everyone to the first non-keynote session of the day. I hope everyone enjoyed the keynote. I did. That was the first time I had seen Jeff speak, and it was amazing. For those that didn't hear the keynote, just a couple quick notes. The more you can participate in chat, the more you can connect with your peers. That creates scores for the leaderboard for you. And we are encouraging people to do that, and we will give away prizes as a way to encourage that, because peer connectivity is all what online education is about. Connecting with your instructor, connecting with your peers. And so we want to see that happen here as well. So there'll be a break after this session where you can go into the lounges or you can connect to folks. If you see someone in the chat that you're like, that person, I'd like to talk to them, you can actually click on their little bubble of their head next to the chat message and bookmark their contact information so you can find them after the session. We'll be doing prizes for in our sponsor booth for Harmonize, as well as in the scavenger hunt that's going to happen after this, which should be a lot of fun. All right, so now into the meat of the day. I am here with Dr. Blackburn and Betty Jo Harris. They are really good at asynchronous discussions and ways to get people involved in that discussion, to get the students to engage with the content, with the instructor, with their peers, etc. And so I'm going to be moderating a little bit, but mostly it's going to be them talking about their experience. If you have a question, put it out in the chat and I will queue it up into the conversation if I can find a place where it fits. Otherwise, we'll create a little space afterwards. And let's get started. So for Rhonda and Betty Jo, the way I was going to frame this is that there's a lot around trying to get the students engaged. In some earlier conversations, we've often talked about, like, how do you create that right prompt to pull the student in? How do you create the right tone or a safe space for them to participate? And like, how are you giving guidance to the students to sort of set it up correctly to start with? So I am going to drop off screen share so we can see everybody's face a little bit better. And I guess I'm going to turn that over to Rhonda to get us started, to kick us off. Like, in terms of, you're in an asynchronous discussion, you're trying to get that conversation happening. You're trying to engage the students. Like, where do you go to start with? Like, what do you do? And then you guys can bounce back and forth, and I will go watch the questions and try to feed things to you guys.
Thank you, Marcus. Yeah, one of the very first things you talked about was that right prompt. Part of that is getting them and yourself to be present in that discussion. And so getting the right prompt, I think, is critical. It's the way to get them to think about the content. It's the way to get them to expand on what they know and maybe even do a little bit more research as they're going and discussing and looking for the right way to get back that information. So Betty Jo, I know that when we talked before, you had some amazing prompts that you used. Can you share some of those with us?
I've really enjoyed the ability to add things to my history classes that will have students thinking not only of the past, but of the present. I'm a firm believer that history doesn't actually repeat, but it does rhyme. So we can make connections. And if a student can make connections with their present, they might retain a little more knowledge, or, as you said earlier, dig a little deeper, see how things relate. So some examples of some prompts I've used is, for example, in the fall of the Roman Empire, boring, students are just like, here we go, here's another one. So I was able to attach through Harmonize a podcast, which the podcast explained the 6 major reasons for the fall of the Roman Empire. And so I worded the prompt where the students should listen to the podcast. Of course, they got history lectures in person or online. They have a textbook. They have other means to get and gather information. But the 6 factors of the fall of the Roman Empire included things like the Black Plague, the bubonic plague, which, with COVID, that could trigger something, environmental issues, changes of climate, which that triggered many more students than I anticipated. Environmental conditions, political conditions, social factors, and it increased the response rate tremendously because they could have some type of engagement with what was going on in the United States as far as what was going on with ancient Rome.
That is so cool. Yeah. One of the things I love is when students kind of get into it, right? They take your prompt and it goes in many different directions. One of the things that I've done, I teach a technology and distance education course, and I always have my students to read what they're supposed to read and then go find a technology that pertains to that. And it's interesting to see what they find. And I get the most amazing things that I've never seen, right? I mean, they'll post things that's like, oh yeah, I know what that is, and I can converse. But then there's other times I'm like, okay, I need to go look this up. So it actually gets not only the other students engaged, but me too. And then to take that and apply it. And I think that's a lot of what you were talking about too, is that application of the fall of the Roman Empire, but you're actually getting them to take that into real lifetimes. So I think that's pretty cool.
Well, in the state of Mississippi, we do not have a large Asian population in my town, which is Natchez, Mississippi, but we do have a large African-American population. And so I've been able to find a safe space for some of those types of questions where you used, I could use racism of Asian Americans with World War II, and I could use civil rights movements and anti-racist questions and prompts where students found a safe spot where maybe they would not have shared as much if they had been one-on-one with each other. But this provided a means for them to share some of their feelings, which I feel is part of the role of an instructor. You teach history to gain empathy for other groups. And I find that these online discussion boards, if worked correctly, I feel a sense of empathy developing with my students, which is hard to do in a traditional classroom setting.
I'm curious and maybe this is actually for out in the chat, I think one of the difficulties is tying your topic to something that is important in the student's life. So if you have something like that, like I teach accounting, and how do I tie that to something the students actually might care about? I'd be interested in throwing those out, and then maybe I can filter those back up into the conversation as you go, because that information sharing, like those types of ideas, are like little nuggets of gold in terms of to get people thinking.
Yeah, definitely. And I love what you're saying, Betty Jo, about that safe zone. So you're probably similar to me and all of us, is that, we start off the semester, introduce yourself, but I always like to kind of make it a little game, find something that someone shared that you have in common with them. So now they're starting to see that connection of people that they don't know in class. Or my favorite is, when you're no longer with us, what do you want to be remembered for? And my younger students thought that was kind of morbid, but it gave them a way to have fun with it, but also start to get to know each other and to create that community in that safe space and that safe zone. So I love that opportunity to utilize that time to be able to allow students to talk and to share and be okay with that.
Well, even with the fall of the Roman Empire, one of the problems then was taxation. And so if I could draw the students into some discourse about what was being mentioned in Congress as far as taxation in the United States, and it really is amazing because when we're younger and we're students and we haven't hit some milestones in our lives, you're pretty black and white. High taxes are bad, low taxes are good. And if I can make some gray areas in those discussions, it's amazing. The fall of the Roman Empire, we got into some discussion about wages and earning in the United States. And the last time the minimum wage was given a bump was in 2009. And so have prices gone up? It all is a mixture, and they could relate to that because most of my students at a community college are going to work as hard as they do in a job as they do in class. And
Yeah.
they jumped on that.
That's
They
cool.
There's a
Yeah.
couple
brings in the
comments that came
accounting
out.
too.
Yeah, there's a couple things that came out in chat that I thought were interesting to highlight on the icebreaker. Like some people are playing bingo just to get the connectivity going. I hear, what are your superpowers here? There's another one that's like draw yourself as a mascot. And I think it's interesting because a lot of these don't have to have anything to do with the content. First, it's just like, who are you? What's going on in your life? And then that can almost kind of help you as you're going on, pull in some of that information to make it a little more personal. Like, oh, you drew yourself as a turtle. Like, good to know. Like, and then how you work that in.
Well, it's interesting because that also, I think, really helps create the tone of the course, right? It really allows the students to be themselves, but to know that if they share something, it's okay that they share it. They're not going to be reprimanded for it. Being able to, I mean, there's a couple of times, I'm sure, Benjo, you've been here too, is that I've read someone's post and it's like, one, I may not know what they're talking about, or that's a little off topic. And being able to help other students see how you can take what they said and take some nugget out of it and realign it to what we were talking about is critical. So students not only get that role model of how do you do that? That was totally off topic. I don't even know how to answer that, but we should all converse. It's a discussion. We should be able to talk to each other. How do we bring that back around to the topic? Have you ever seen any of that in your life?
I have particularly one student comes to mind, and she is in the track of this junior college education where she has a special learning plan. And so a lot of times she will address other members in the chat just by their last name, like Blackburn. Why did you say that? It's very blunt, and it's very, and she'll post pictures, but that is her way to communicate. And if I can go back and kind of communicate and say, oh, Mrs. So-and-so or Miss Blackburn, I can kind of lead it to where she's learning how to better address her classmates.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of have some life skills in some of this too. Most of our students come, at least here in Mississippi, with not a lot of background in what is accepted chat and discussion. They need some guidance on how to address each other and how to address their teacher.
I totally agree. And I also had quite a few students in the program that I'm in that were international. And so having people come in that may not be 100% fluent in English. And so sometimes their sentence structure or what they're trying to say isn't always coming through in probably what they want to say. You kind of, so being able to help them craft that message. And so, you ask, and, one of the things is I don't know about you, but I have students that have a really hard trouble of how to expand on the conversation and be able to show them how to ask the right questions or to get more information, or, this is how I handled this, but I have a question about what you did or something. So that way it's not just surface level learning and discussion, it gets deeper, right? Kind of like we were talking about earlier. That's always interesting and fun, but I know that can be also very stressful for some students. One thing I think that students like about discussions is that it is asynchronous, so they don't have to always think on the top of their head, whatever's on top of their brain. They can have time to think about it. I've also encouraged people to use the writing center, if they have one, available, to, here's my prompt and here's what I'm going to say, especially at the beginning of the semester when they're just learning how to do it. Then the writing center, oh, this may be a better sentence structure for this, or something like that, to help them deliver their thoughts and to get that on paper. And one thing I found is that when they do that, I actually get better papers from them, because they're now learning how to articulate and develop that thought.
Something
You know,
interesting came up
with the Honor Society at the community college level is called Phi Theta Kappa. And I've been able to use some online discussion boards to help direct our class, especially during the pandemic. They have weekly modules that they need to respond. We're doing a campus-wide read. And I've noticed that it has been really helpful to give them the means to go deeper and do a little research, because that's part of the mission of this Honor Society, is to have these students do a little scholarly research in a library to at least get some skills to do that. And if I can word the prompt and direct them toward a library website with peer-reviewed papers, it's usually the first time they've had the chance to do that. And so an online platform, how easy can that be? You just go to your online database at your library and you start looking for the correct materials to use with your replies. So that's helpful.
A couple questions came up in chat, I think, that are relative. The first one was about direct versus indirect instruction, modeling the behavior you're looking to see. I know you guys were talking about how to get them to respond correctly. Like, how much of that do you do through modeling versus the structure in the prompt, or sending them off to external resources?
So one of the things, I don't know if this is going to totally answer, but one of the things that I do is I try to help guide them through questions and stuff like that in the discussion, but I love utilizing the feedback I give them when I'm grading the discussions. So when I'm grading the discussions, I always give comments, and that's where I can give feedback. And to me, sometimes that's the more direct. I noticed that you replied to some of the students, and one of my suggestions is maybe you should ask questions about what they're doing. That will help you dig a little deeper into the topic, or something like that. So that's one of the ways that I do a lot of direct teaching on kind of how to do it, is through that feedback. So it's personal, it's to them, and it's not to everyone. Now, if I see that like everyone's off, then I may do something a little bit more direct in the discussion, but usually that's how I do it. How about you, Betty Jo?
I do give a lot of feedback, and to get back on an example, because I do better with examples, with this campus-wide read, we have the vice president, or the dean of our community college, participating. And last week we hit a really, I thought, very powerful point in our program. We broke into groups, and one of the questions about the book we're reading was a topic called uplift suasion. And not to go deep into the topic, but it's how in a community like Natchez, Mississippi, where do you draw the line in a college setting where you have correct grammar and scholarly English, where you're responding to your discussion prompts and you're not just texting your prompt, how you would talk to your sister at home. And so it was a chance for us to all verbally share, and our vice president is African American, and she is a chemistry PhD, and she was able to share her own experience of writing her questions and responding to discussion questions using standard English. Standard English is the English used by corporations. If we're going to educate our students, they need to use that. She said, but when she gets home, that's not how she speaks to her family. And I thought that was very interesting for our students to get such a powerful example of how, as an instructor, I'm grading your replies and your discussions because it's my job to show you to model the correct behavior, the correct English to use with your questions. Does that make sense?
Yeah. One of the things that I have discouraged is like the use of acronyms and the use of slang, unless it's appropriate. I mean, there's times that that's an appropriate part of your response, but to, I guess, be more kind of corporate, right? You know, how would you go and talk to your boss compared to talk to your peer that's right next to you, right? Or colleague.
So in feedback, whether you're discussing Allah and the Muslim expansion in the world, or the fall of Rome, or World War II, you can use some of that common sense knowledge as you're giving feedback.
Yeah, definitely. Marcus, was there something else?
There was a little bit of a pivot, but I think it's an important one because we're in this whole world of what is synchronous and what is asynchronous. Someone asked, when do you go synchronous? Like, when do you do a live session? How do you? I'm gonna extrapolate a little beyond that and be like, well, how do you lace that into? You're in an asynchronous world. How do you prep them to come into a synchronous world? And then what do you do afterwards? So you kind of get that melding. Like, how do you treat a Zoom recording, Zoom session, live session in terms of all the stuff we're talking about in terms of asynchronous discussion?
So one of the things that I do, and I set this at the very beginning of the class, is that I do 4 synchronous meetings a semester. Usually they are to help the students get more clarification on the bigger projects that we have going on. But the very first one is the very first week of school, and it's my orientation meeting. So I have all my students come together. I send out a doodle poll. So I see when is because it's not actually on the schedule. I don't have to do synchronous meetings, but I like them. And so I send out a doodle poll to all of my students and say, hey, when is the best time you can meet? These are the times I can meet, right? So when's the best time you can meet with these times? And I used to make sure that anyone that replied got a time for a synchronous meeting. So there was one time that I did like 5 synchronous orientations, and I'm like, okay, this is way too much. So now I tell them I'm going to pick the one with the most people and I will record them and I will send out the recording to everyone. So they still get that opportunity. But so that meeting, that first synchronous meeting, I do a couple of things. One, it sets the tone of the course. So I try to start setting the tone through the discussion, through the getting people to, who are you? Introduce yourself, post. But I really try to push that the culture of the course and the tone in that first synchronous meeting, and then they get to know me. So I ask them, and I give them you can ask me anything you want in this meeting. I don't care. Most people don't, ask me much that's not course related, but every once in a while they're like, okay, we can't see you face to face, so how tall really are you? And so we kind of have fun with it. But all the others are really to prepare them for the big projects. But during that time, we can talk about anything as well once I get that done. And I prepare them just by that very first meeting helps kind of prepare them not only for the course and the discussions and the other synchronous meetings, but I always remind them what we're going to be talking about for each one. And then I always follow up with the recording and some takeaways from it that I provide to the students.
Gabriella asked if those are mandatory synchronous sessions.
They are not. I can't make them mandatory. And so they do sign up, and that's why I record them as well, because not everyone, I mean, this is an asynchronous course that I teach. And so I can't expect everyone to be there. There's been times that I've actually had all of my students there, and that surprised me, just because usually there's always something going on. But yeah, so they're not mandatory.
Betty Jo, how about you?
I teach 3 different types of courses. I teach all online, I teach all on ground, and then I teach hybrid. And so what I do, I just build my courses the exact same way. I have recorded my history lectures, and since my class is based on, the true facts of history by scholars, and it's very subject oriented. So I just put out in the beginning of the year, I do a video to introduce myself. I explain how my class works. You either attend live, you watch the lectures, or you do half and half. Everyone has the same information. I explain how the discussions work. They have an assignment each week and a quiz each week. Then they have, of course, the proctored midterm and final exams. So mine is it's just set up differently because when you're on a subject, the student has to get their information before they can even participate in a discussion. They have to have some level. I mean, it's very apparent when they don't do the work before they answer the questions, and it shows in their grades. I mean, you can't discuss the fall of the Roman Empire if you don't even know how it got built or why it was not Greece doing it prior to them. It's just different the way it's set up with history.
A question came out in chat as well. Like, how do you, if those sessions are not mandatory, do you have any strategies for encouraging people to attend those so that they can get a little face-to-face time? Or is it just if they come, they come?
So I do share this. My students have always said that those synchronous meetings are one of the highlights of the course, which I don't know what that says about the rest of my course, but they love to be able to come and not only meet me, but other students in the class. I mean, that sometimes that is the only time they meet, because it's a completely asynchronous program. So it's sometimes the only time they've actually seen any of their other colleagues. It was interesting. So last year I ended up teaching a couple of other courses besides the one I always teach. And all of those students were my previous students from my first class. So it was really fun to kind of see them, how they've grown from the beginning of the program to almost the end. But they would tell me then, oh, I hope you're having your synchronous meetings. I mean, they look forward to them. And they usually, I mean, because I record them and I share, a lot of them were like, oh man, I wish I really wanted to come because, I wanted to talk to you about this and ask you questions. And I tell them they can always just ask me questions anyway, but I've never been stood up. There has been a time, I think it was just me and one other student, so they got a one-on-one, which they loved. But again, I still record them and send that out. So I don't know, my students just come, I guess. I don't know.
Well, and I can say, it's not paradise over here at Colin Community College in Mississippi either, because right after the beginning of the semester, I passed a young man who's in one of my hybrid sections. So he sees me one day a week. He sees me online, or he chooses not to see me online the other day. None of my business. They're grown-ups. And he said, Ms. Harris, he passed me in the hall, and I said, yes, Troy, how can I help you? He said, oh, never mind. And I said, well, no, go ahead. How can I help you with this course? And he said, I just want to tell you, there is a woman, she looks just like you, and she hangs out in the library all the time. And I said, Troy, that would be me. My office is in the library. I'm the same person. And so, Troy was totally confused about who's this woman online and who's hanging out in the library. So, you do have issues. I mean, it's not paradise. You've got to work through those issues. I hopefully Troy, I'm also Troy's advisor. So I think Troy's gotten to know me a little better this semester.
That is great.
That is pretty good. There's some folks that are definitely interested in staying a little late, like we talked about. So this session is technically supposed to end now, but we're going to keep on talking and hang out if you'd like. Otherwise, you're welcome to go connect with other folks via the chat or the lounges. Something that I wanted to put back to you guys, we had talked about previously and spent a lot of time on, is like the guidance to the students. You know, how are you avoiding that 11:59, everyone gets in their homework or their discussion prompt at the very last minute? Like, what are you doing to structure the prompt or structure the guidance such that you're actually getting students to engage earlier so that you can actually get some intermingling of ideas?
So I actually have set it up to where they have to give an original or initial post before a certain time during the week, and then they have the rest of it to reply. Not that they can't reply before that time as well, but that really does help with getting students to pace themselves and to really truly have a discussion. But I also think it goes all the way back to tone of the course and your expectations. So being able to really help them understand this is how to be successful in this course. And one of them is to kind of follow what we were talking about when, make sure you do your initial post by this time. And then you have an opportunity through the rest of the time to really have that discussion with the other students in the class. So that's kind of how I do it.
Yeah, I do the same. I use milestones. And so if the assignment opens up on a Sunday morning, the initial post is due by Wednesday. The comments and reactions are due later in the week, but you have to get participation by setting a milestone. I think that's important.
I agree. It always drove me crazy when you got everyone replying on the last day. It's like,
as I say in my comments sometimes, this is not a discussion. This is an agreement. Yeah.
well, and you take that and you go back all the way back to the prompt that you use. You can create a prompt that is more of an assignment, or is it a real discussion, right? And I always tell people, if I read people's replies to my prompt and I am bored and it's not going anywhere, I have the wrong prompt. If there's nothing that I want to reply to, it's like, and everyone's saying the same thing, it's like, okay, that's just an assignment. It's not a discussion. So it's obviously discussion's a type of an assignment for them, but being able to help them kind of get out of answer these questions. And I hate when they like take a sentence that I do and post it and then answer. I'm like, no, this is not, no,
Yeah.
So you stay away from the transactional, then you're really looking at like super open-ended stuff and you build that in.
Definitely.
Interesting. Yeah, because we see people doing both things in the discussion tools where it's like, this is an assignment and I just want to be able to have you turn it in and maybe do a little discussion around it versus the true open-ended ones.
Yeah.
You kind of I guess you got to decide what you're going to do. What's your intent? Like, I'm creating a discussion. What do I want here? And do I just want to give them a grade for participating and checking the box, or grading more on a rubric of quality and thought?
Yeah, and I think like you said, it kind of goes back to that expectation and the purpose of everything in your course, right? There shouldn't be anything in your course that is just to check a box. It should be that there is a reason that I'm having you read this. There's a reason I'm having you watch this. There's a reason that I'm having you reply to this or do this particular assignment and things like that. So I think that's it.
I do attach a rubric to my discussion, to my assignment. I mean, you've got to do that, or you just don't have any boundaries set up on what you're looking for.
Exactly. I agree.
Yeah, that's good. Someone was just asking about rubrics in the chat. I was going to queue it up. And do you structure those around the amount or the quality or the points they're hitting? Like, how do you, if you're trying to do an open-ended discussion but attach a rubric to it, what kind of things are you looking at? Are you looking at well, I'll just stop there. What things are you looking for?
For me, with history, which I think is pretty easy, if I am going to put in attach a podcast or an eyewitness account or some primary document, in their discussion, they need to be able to use some of those materials to have some semblance that they know what's going on when they reply. So that's always one of the things in my rubric. Has used provided materials to create or craft their response or their post.
Mhm.
You know, history, it's all about sourcing. And so you can't just say, oh, those poor Romans, the empire fell and it was so sad. Well, you know, you get that in discussions if you don't have the right prompt. You know, poor Caesar, he was stabbed. You have to have where they go into materials to give you some intelligent type post. So
That's interesting. Someone brought up something I hadn't heard of or thought of before. Tara did in the chat, which is a student developed rubrics. What do they want? I'm curious, have you guys ever tried that? I was trying to think functionally how that would work. It sounds hard, but interesting.
no, I have a totalitarian classroom, I guess. Yeah. I'm interested. I would be interested in learning about that.
And it looks like Rhonda's frozen. Rhonda, are you still with us on audio? Going with no. So Betty Jo, it's you and I now. I do love the totalitarian classroom type idea. It's kind of goes
Well,
back
you
to
know,
our.
I'm the mother of 4 sons too, so I had to be large and in charge in my home. So you know, I hate to do that in a classroom because I believe students need a voice, but that has probably been very helpful for my classes to use this discussion board where they have more of a voice. And I'm not just throwing information at them, which sometimes in history you feel that way. It kind of can be drudgery for them as well as me.
Yeah, brain banking, I think, is the theory of like, I'm going to take the information from my brain and put it into your brain, but they can get that from lectures or videos
Yeah,
without.
they never learn. I don't think they have any lasting learning when you do that. I think you have to, even in history, make it some type of relative situation where they can have some empathy. That emotion, something about emotions helps you keep it in your brain, I think.
It's interesting. I would just bring this up in case people aren't following the chat. So Tara, the woman who brought it up, the things is talking about a co-developed rubric where basically they're using Google Docs to describe, here's the topic, what are you hoping to achieve out of it? Sounds super interesting. I don't.
It does.
I've never heard that before. So Tara, thank you for that idea.
I think if you're in a situation too where you have students who have some background or I'll just put it out there, a good foundational education that can work. I don't know if that would work in my situation here in Mississippi. I'm just going to be honest. I don't know how, I don't think they would understand how my students, the majority of them, not all of them, would understand how to create their own rubric.
Yeah, rubrics are complicated. I could see that, like, but it's interesting because it would almost force a higher level thinking. I guess we don't have to rabbit hole on this too much, but it's like,
yes,
think about what you might think that I might want you to think about.
It's true. It's true. That's a definite critical thinking skill that I would love to introduce my students to.
You got a nice call out in chat, by the way. Avery says she wished she had you as a history teacher. Maybe she would have actually liked the subject.
Well, tell her that my son, the one in Austin again, he when he has a down day, he'll go watch Band of Brothers because it makes him happy, which is really weird, but I was his history teacher. So, you know, that makes me happy. You know, I feel like teaching 2 of my own children, they benefited.
Okay. Well, we ran about 10 minutes over. Betty Jo, do you have any parting things you're like, why didn't you ask me about this that you want to share?
No, I think I talked too much as it is, but I've enjoyed it. It's been a great conversation.
All right. So if anyone, I'm going to do a promotion here for connecting you with each other again, like, because we're rewarding prizes for this. If anyone in here is like, I really want to talk to someone about online discussions, you know, throw it out in chat that's something you want to connect with someone on, and you can compare notes on. Maybe it's the student developed rubric with Tara or such. So if you do throw out in chat, if you're interested in talking about that, people will be able to click on the icon next to your chat name, and they can bookmark you or reach out to you. You know, as Betty Jo and Dr. Blackburn said before she went away in Zoom land, this is all about creating that connection and getting people to think. So we're priming the pump with a 30 or 40-minute conversation, but by all means, try to continue. Coming up, we have a scavenger hunt, which should be super fun. If you've never done a virtual scavenger hunt, it can start a little awkward, but then it gets kind of goofy and interesting. And then we're going to dive into the new Fed guidelines on RSI, regular and substantive interaction, which applies a lot to online discussions because they're one of the key 4 points that are listed as a type of substantive interaction that you can have. And so we have a couple panelists to talk through the practical side of that. So if you're interested, or even if you haven't heard of those, it would be good to attend because they're relatively new guidelines coming out, and the universities and colleges are working to figure out how to deal with that. So that is coming up as well. The shameless plug for Harmonize, I am going to be talking about the new features we're launching. So if you are a Harmonize user or interested in that, you could attend, and that will be purely Harmonize focused. If you have no interest in the tool, I don't recommend attending that because it's all I'm going to be talking about in that one as we go. And yeah, that's all. So hopefully I will see you guys in upcoming sessions. And Betty Jo, thank you so much. And Rhonda in absentia, thank you so much.